Hello and welcome once again to Cave of Apologetics. I am Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're kicking off a new book today, and that is The Great Debate, Does God Exist? And for those familiar with our channel, we are unapologetic in our apologetics, and that's the joke you have to make, that we tend to side on the presuppositional camp. But what does all that mean? How is that made popular? How did we hear about that? Well, this book is a transcript of a debate by Greg Bahnsen and Gordon Stein, who debated back in the 80s, and it was unassuming, and then it blew up. And I think the propagation of this debate was recorded in cassette poor quality, and then I think most of us probably first encountered off probably Sermon Audio, which is a phenomenal site. I have contacted the owner of the site before and worked just a little bit with him in other capacities, and it was always neat to have hosted debates on there. And so I stumbled upon this one, and then when I was over at Tony's house one day, he popped in a cassette, and I was like, man, this sounds really familiar. And we were just having a good time listening to Greg Bahnsen take down Gordon Stein, but I don't think we actually knew exactly what we were listening to because it was so different. Because when you hear about atheist Christian debate, you tend to think of William Lane Craig, and in fact, the book kind of has a foreword where it gives due diligence to recognizing Craig and his accomplishments as well. But this one is quite different, and so this one has been a big impact, especially in the past probably 10, 15 years, with the rise of presuppositional apologetics being more prevalent, probably in the online space, and having to deal with different things. Not that we all don't like our other brothers across the aisle, but this one was different. And so I know Dr. Tim McGrew has said that he has always appreciated more so the written debate form. And so this is the best of both worlds. So because this is such a monumental debate, there have been people that have taken Dr. Bahnsen's items that he's taught on or preached in audio quality and bought the rights, and the Bahnsen Institute has worked tirelessly to clean them up. And so now we have better qualities of things that Tony and I were listening on cassette tapes. I think for our audience, I don't have to explain what a cassette tape is, but for my own children, handing them a VHS player and having them try and put in the tape is quite funny. So
and this debate was all audio. There was no video at all. So
there's no audience recognition of
and the tapes, the one when we first listened to it, was not good quality at all.
We were trying to listen hard. Maybe that's why it was so impactful, because you really had to listen. Yeah. So this is a transcript, and Joshua Pillows is the man who's tirelessly probably typed this out, and he offers some commentary and some unpublished notes. There's appendices that I'm sure we'll cover, and he's been a person in the presuppositional apologetics camp for a bit, and a very talented musician as well. So I'll be sure to link to his stuff and the Bahnsen Project and audio version of the debate, and also a link to where you can purchase The Great Debate, Does God Exist?, which is our book. And so we're going to start, of course, with the foreword by friend of the show, and I can legitimately say that, Eli Ayala, who gives the foreword here. So he says at the beginning, tag your it. Again, the joke that you have to make. You have to. It's like referencing 1 Peter for apologetics. So he said that when Dr. Stein turned to respond to Dr. Bahnsen's transcendental argument for the existence of God, or tag, it quickly became evident that he was in over his head. So this is Eli's kind of interaction, his first take of this debate. And so people nowadays might have come across tag or presuppositionalism other way, but for us old fogies, this is how we first interacted with it. So it's neat that someone so prevalent, who Eli is a great guy, and Revealed Apologetics is his YouTube channel, so you should definitely check him out. He's been working with the Apologia guys a lot more, and his content is always very friendly and very informative, and he really knows his stuff. He has to talk to a bunch of high schoolers, so it really fits my niche of like making sure that I understand, because it's definitely a highbrow level, but he can at least talk to me, so I appreciate that. So instead of directly addressing Dr. Bahnsen's argument, Dr. Stein attempted to refute points that Dr. Bahnsen never made. By the time he finally engaged with what Bahnsen actually presented, it became even clearer that his atheistic perspective stood no chance against the full force of the Christian worldview. So again, a good build up to this, to why you should pick up this book.
Exactly. So Eli tells us that his first encounter with the debate after spending, he says, considerable time familiarizing himself with classical apologetics, right? So we're aware of that, the various traditional arguments for the existence of God, right? The cosmological argument and so forth. And so he says, after spending considerable time familiarizing himself with those kinds of classical apologetic arguments, which emphasizes the argument for the existence of God through natural philosophy, he said he was caught completely off guard when he stumbled upon a debate between two individuals he had never heard of before, Dr. Greg Bahnsen and Dr. Gordon Stein. And again, as you mentioned, this is pretty much what we thought as well. Wow. Yeah, this is different, right? And so it says he began listening and he immediately sensed something strikingly different from every other debate that he encountered. Instead of arguing for the probability, the reasonableness, or high plausibility of God's existence, Bahnsen was arguing for the necessity and absolute certainty of the Christian God. And so this was kind of a different kind of deal, right, that he was striking with regard to Bahnsen.
Yeah, and as we go through Dr. Bahnsen's opening statement, that there does seem to be a few mic drop moments in here that will set the debate up really well for the even bigger ones. That even on the old audio cassettes, you could hear the audience reacting, which is quite an impressive feat there as well.
Yeah.
Well, Eli goes on to say that this approach resonated deeply with his convictions as a Christian, aligning powerfully with the teachings of Scripture. The Scripture doesn't have us say, well, if a God of the Bible exists, this is what we expect to find. So therefore, go tell the nations of this high probability event of Jesus' resurrection. It talks about the truth and God being the only source of truth and the only way that we can go through life and the purpose of life. It answers all the questions that mankind has pondered, and they've only been able to ponder that because, well, the Bible tells us exactly why that's happened. So even within the meta-analysis of it, it offers an explanation. And he goes on to say that, and to top it off, Bahnsen didn't just defend his position, he utterly dismantled his atheist opponent, demonstrating the sheer intellectual force of a Christian worldview. And as we'll get into this, and Bahnsen will mention, Dr. Stein, he wasn't a slouch. This wasn't some hapless college professor who was taken unaware. This was someone who put aside his initial pedigree and went full force through defending atheism. So this was something of a feat to do. As Eli began reading Bahnsen's books and sifting through his many recorded lectures, he became increasingly convinced that presuppositional apologetics was not only the most powerful method of defending faith, it was the most biblical. And I will mention Faith Has Its Reasons book that we covered before. It breaks down all these ones. So if you're looking for more complete walkthrough of things like classical apologetics, evidential apologetics, there's Theism, presuppositional apologetics, and then a fifth one that kind of tries to combine all those things. That's the book I would recommend for you. caveofthecross.com, middle of the page, the book's right there.
All right. So what's the value of the book? Well, Eli suggests that this book is worth your time because it not only showcases the practical and applicational outworking of the presuppositionalist apologetic method in a real debate setting, but it also deepens our understanding of its application. And so through insightful commentary, this particular book that we're going to be looking at, Eli tells us, walks the reader through the debate, unpacking key moments and providing further analysis that will undoubtedly broaden and strengthen one's ability to defend the faith biblically. So he is highly recommending that we work our way through this book. And thank you very much, Lord willing, as we go, we will work our way.
So on February 11th, 1985, the Great Debate, Does God Exist?, between Drs. Greg L. Bahnsen and Gordon Stein took place at the University of California, Irvine. The debate had been marked by several peculiar aspects: this then unfamiliar Christian apologetic method, an unprepared debater, and the provoking of laughter and applause from the audience at several points. Kind of unheard of. You're not supposed to do those things during a debate. Moreover, according to accounts, it was seen by both Christians and atheists alike as a decisive victory for the Christian Dr. Bahnsen, in part due to Dr. Stein's lack of preparation. It has sincerely, regrettably, been the only one of a handful of public debates illustrating the presuppositional approach to Christian apologetics, up until, recently with the advent of the internet, with the propagation of Dr. Bahnsen and Cornelius Van Til, who Dr. Bahnsen would definitely give deference, a loving nod back to kind of the person who popularized it, and so this was this was a watershed moment for a lot of people. Dr. James White got his start in debating because of Dr. Bahnsen's sickness that kept him out. So we can thank the long line of Christian history to get us to Dr. White's over 100 debates now. So we've now have more examples to us of how a biblical defense of the Christian position from a Christian worldview can happen. He's not the only one, but definitely a big source for them.
And this idea of lack of preparation is really important. Apparently, Stein was ready to argue with regard to classical, theological, classical arguments for the existence of God. And so what Bahnsen did came from a whole different perspective with regard to, defending the faith. And Stein was stymied. We might.
Yeah, well, and sometimes you see this with people. So like debates with Bart Ehrman. He uses the same jokes. It's the same presentation. He's got his retainer already, so he's already been paid, and he's just doing what you do, and he's expecting the same type of rebuttal time periods. And so it's really interesting when you find someone who actually kind of challenges them in a different way. So those ones are hard to watch, and I tend to skip just to the cross-examination portion to a lot of his debates.
All right, so Joshua Pillow in this preface then tells us that what follows the debate was over a year-long discussion of letters back and forth between Bahnsen and Stein, where Bahnsen once more had to explain tag, right, the transcendental argument for God, and defended against rather rudimentary criticisms from Dr. Stein.
Right. So letters with like actual stamps and mail people and time in between and no one to retweet or to ratio people
with paper and stuff like that and ink. He tells us that unfortunately upon threat of litigation, Dr. Stein demanded that the letters never be made public, right? So Stein didn't want these letters made public. However, he says that since there is no legal issue in Bahnsen's letters being publicized for the first time, he tells us, since that discourse 40 years ago, excerpts of Bahnsen's letters then to Stein with regard to this back and forth over a year period will be made public in this book that we're taking a look at.
So again, another reason for picking up this book is to have the commentary and also these additional commentary by Bahnsen himself. Well, unlike the rest of his material, this book will serve not as an academic reading and analysis of the apologetic, but rather as a practical application of it. This is literally going out into the world and engaging in the ideas and presenting forth the Christian worldview against all others. And this aids in the learning apologist in the execution of the necessary mandate of 1 Peter 3:15, always being ready. Again, if you have to get one tattoo, that's one that you get as an apologist to remember and to always do so with gentleness and respect as well. But we must recognize the antithesis between believers and unbelievers, not simply morally and salvifically, but intellectually, in not bowing down to the demands of neutrality for the sake of open-mindedness. If you just go to our YouTube page and the little magnifying glass on our page and type in neutrality, you'll find a whole slew of videos that talk about what is this neutrality. And so we'll get into it a little bit, but if you're really jonesing for figuring out what all this is, we have a number of videos on that as well. Well, presuppositionalism is the only apologetic that truly acknowledges the foolishness of neutral thinking with the unbeliever. Just put aside your Bible, let's talk man to man and figure out if God exists. But I'm a Christian. I can't put down my Bible. You're asking me to put down the thing that I'm going to point to and that I point to. This isn't a general theism, which Bahnsen will cover in his opening, but a Christian specific argumentation. So this is arguing with unbelievers apart from God's word in hopes of getting to the conclusion that Christianity is true. Right? That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to find, we're not going to fly a shuttle to the moon, dig around in the moon dust and hope to find a piece of God's toenail, and only the Christian God. This comes from a philosophical point of view that argues from the biblical Christian God perspective. So setting Christ aside and engaging in worldly wisdom is something which God explicitly forbids us to do. Pretend you're an atheist. Well, I don't want to, and I can't, right? So those are the things we can't do. And so Dr. Bahnsen kind of doesn't take this approach, but provides the full force of the Christian witness against the all other perspectives.
So that's the preface of the book. So we've looked at kind of Eli's, general take here, introduction, and a preface of the book. Let's get into the book itself, and it's
Yeah.
broken down into these various, it's the debate format that they
Hmm.
actually had, right? So there's an opening statement by Bahnsen and an opening statement by Stein and rebuttals and that sort of thing. And so that's really kind of how the book is broken down. And so we'll just kind of work our way through this particular debate, exactly how it took place. I was telling, as I was mentioning to you earlier, it was tough trying to figure out exactly what to say because, especially with Bahnsen's opening statements here, that he has a lot of good stuff and you want to be able to say it all, but obviously,
Yeah. I
just,
mean, he spends a good majority of this kind of clarifying what he's going to clarify,
yeah.
because I think he too recognized that Dr. Stein probably had a script that he was going off of and wasn't going to initially engage. In fact, I wonder if behind the scenes, and this might be a question that we can ask Joshua when if Lord willing we ever talk to him, is if he knows if the format of the debate, because if you look at the table of contents, it being broken down by the debate tactics format, you have it having be more additional opening statements as well later on, and then back and forth and rebuttal periods. And so this isn't our kind of your normal YouTube slaughterfest debate format. This is this is a very legitimate format for debate, and I wonder if Bahnsen kind of allowed for this or positioned for it so that Stein could have more room to breathe from
Yeah,
his argument
or
here.
maybe more rope to hang him.
Well, good.
So, yeah, what Bonson does here is he spends a lot of time in this introduction just laying out things before even, oftentimes in the beginning, you kind of lay out your position, then give an explanation of it. Bonson really doesn't do that. He doesn't really lay out his position till he gets to the very last few minutes of the debate,
Right.
and then he gives his position, what it is. And then, it's over. But he spends doing a lot of work at the beginning to try to make sure that it's clear where he's coming from and what he's talking about. And so Bonson begins by saying that he wants to begin the evening with three opening and introductory remarks about the nature of the debate itself. The nature of the debate. Notice the debate is about whether or not God exists, but he wants to talk about how we ought to debate. That's what he wants to talk about here,
Yeah.
right? And so he says, first of all, it's necessary at the outset of the debate to define our terms. And, obviously that's always the case. And in particular
Don't
here,
we always say that? We always
yeah,
say that here.
he says he should make clear what he means when he uses the term God. So he's going to start off with defining. He says he wants to specify that he's arguing particularly in favor of Christian theism. That's what you alluded to earlier, right? And for it as a unit or system of thought, not for anything like theism in general. And there are three reasons that he gives for why he wants to talk specifically about Christian theism. So oftentimes we're used to this general, does God exist? What do we mean by God? Well, some theist, supernatural, whatever. Bahnsen is saying, no, 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 no. I'm talking about the Christian God,
Mhm.
Christian theism. That's what I want to talk about tonight.
Yeah.
And so that's how he begins his opening statement here.
Right. So with something like classical theism, there's kind of that two-step approach. With evidentialism, it's almost a one-step. You get right to the heart of who Jesus is, and then you say that he's God because of all the things that he was able to do and claim and be. And then we can trust that he's God. This is a different approach for Dr. Stein. So hopefully he's listening carefully. Well, first, the various conceptions of deity found in world's religions are, in most cases, logically incompatible, leaving no unambiguous sense to general theism, whatever that might be. So again, you have your atheist person online saying, well, which God? Point to which God? We just hold up the Bible and we point to that one and we say that one. That's it. That's always what we're arguing for. So yes, we're not here for Thor or Vishnu or Ganesh. We're for the biblical Christian God, and he wrote a book, and we made it available to anyone who would like it in pretty much whatever language they would like. And if you have a language it's not translated into, please let us know because we'll translate into that and we'll civilize your country with it. So you're welcome.
So this notion then of just kind of a general deity he's suggesting is logically incompatible
Right.
right? All the religions are talking about God. He says, no, that's logically incompatible. And it's ambiguous in terms of what exactly do you mean, right? And so he wants to dismiss with that, right? That's what he's getting.
Yeah. How do you argue for that? Well, it's a being. Well, all right. So being, and then also it's, so a singular purpose. Well, what about theism? What about, a general, the universe, the entire universe itself? Pantheism is God. So you almost can't even define the term without first running into the need for qualification. So this is very specific here. Well, secondly, he has not found the non-Christian religions to be philosophically defensible, each of them being, and here's this too, internally incoherent and undermining human reason and experience. And this is the shot across the bow. You don't realize it yet, but this is what presuppositionalism is, and it's what Bahnsen is going to really harp on as well. So it must be internally coherent then, and it must not undermine the things that we experience as well. And thirdly, since I am, by the grace of God, he says, a Christian, I cannot from the heart adequately defend those religious faiths which he disagrees with. Again, being honest with his approach, talking about the biblical Christian God. I am a Christian. If the God of the Bible is true and I claim to be his follower, then asking me to do anything opposite of that would be an insult to you and an insult to me, and then ultimately an insult to God. So those are his three qualifications for general theism.
Right. All right. So he begins by saying, let's get our definitions straight, right? I'm talking about Christian theism, not some general concept which is incoherent and ambiguous with regard to God, whatever that means, right? Says that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Christian God. And he doesn't want to defend some, amorphous God concept that's out there somewhere, right? All right, then next what he says is he talks about what the debate is and isn't about. And so he's going to give us some ideas of what the debate isn't about first, right? What it isn't about. And he says he wants to observe that, and we should indicate, he says, that just what is and is not the issue at the debate, and on the basis of which he hopes to consider the debate. He says it must be made clear that he's not debating about that he is debating about philosophical systems. So he's debating about philosophical systems, he tells us, and not the people who adhere to or profess the philosophical systems. So he wants to focus on the systems and not the people. In other words, he wants to avoid ad hominem attacks and so forth, right?
Yeah. Well, Christians for thousands of years did all these bad things. So I'm sure Bahnsen probably had listened or read Stein's previous debates and probably had those type of argumentations in mind when he crafted his opening statement here.
Right. So he says his concern is with the objective merits of the case which can be made for atheism or Christian theism and not related subjective or personal matters. And again, he has three reasons or illustrations for why he wants to say this.
Amazing how much a trinity of explanations have to come up. Well, the first one is putting personalities aside. The personalities of those individuals who adhere to different systems of thoughts are not really relevant to the truth or falsity of the claims made by those systems. So again, we're not talking about the application of the systems. We're talking about the systems itself. You might want to talk about things like maybe human flourishing. You might want to talk about which philosophical systems, worldviews tend to get you those. I think that's a conversation in 2025 now that we're having pretty intensely as to what political or theological systems are helping to and adding to and preserving human flourishing. But that's not what is happening in 1985, and that's not what is happening in this debate. Well, also number two is, secondly, subjective claims made about the experience and inner satisfaction or peace. Claims that are made, interestingly, by both Christians and atheists in their literature are always subjected to conflicting interpretations and explanations, being, I think, more autobiographical than telling us anything for sure about the truth of the system under consideration. So this isn't like, well, I'm not convinced of these things. Well, congratulations. You're not convinced. Great. Point point you? Like, what do we do with this? This isn't to convince you from beating over the head and those type of debates. They only happen in movies. You only have the person at the end of the debate just utterly flabbergasted, and his entire world is entirely made up. So I think of the end of The Fountainhead with the two big debaters, with Rourke and his antagonist, and he just makes the perfect case for it and silences the crowd and his opponent. That doesn't quite happen, and so what do we take away from this? It's not to have this personal declaration, but it's to us to consider whether these systems in place, which one offers the better and more complete explanation.
Right. All right. So he's given us then these three, reasons here why he doesn't want to focus on individuals or people, right? So first of all, personalities aside, he doesn't, he's not talking about personalities. You can be mean and still, or nice or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the system of thought that he wants to consider, what Christianity is, or what atheism is, right? What it claims. Not, and secondly, experience, right? Well, it gives me peace. It gives me satisfaction. He says, well, both Christians and atheists claim that. So that's not what he's talking about either, right? He's talking about, again, the system of thought. And thirdly, he says actions aside. The issue is not whether atheists or professing Christians have ever done anything undesirable or morally unacceptable. That's not the issue. Right? It's not your actions. The question is not whether adherents of these systems have lived spotless lives, he tells us, but whether atheism or Christian theism as a philosophical system are objectively true. So again, he's nailing home what he's talking about here, right? And so he will be defending Christian theism, and he says he will be defending it as a philosophical system.
Yeah. So this is Bahnsen really shoring up the avenue of travel. He really is defining the boundaries for it. He's giving acknowledgments, but also saying that's not what the debate is, and who cares? We're not talking about that specifically. He's really honing it in. And when we see Stein's opening statement, we'll see why that was important to the nature of this debate. That really, again, set the stage for why this is called the Great Debate. All right, so how about the nature of the debate? His last introductory remark is simply to the effect that he says, I want to concede to my opponent all issues pertaining to the control of ovarian maturations in the Japanese quail.
Wow. Okay.
I mean,
where's that? What is that?
I mean, if you're not Gordon Stein, you have no clue why Dr. Bahnsen talked about that. But he says that this was the subject of Gordon Stein's doctoral dissertation in 1974 at Ohio State. So, I mean, at least he knows his opponent, right? So yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if Dr. Bahnsen actually read that doctoral dissertation. But he goes on to say that for some reason, Dr. Stein has, over the last decade, left his field of expertise and given his life to a campaign for atheism. So, stop believing in your God, and I'm going to dedicate my entire life to make sure that people don't believe in something.
Not the ovarian maturation in Japanese quail.
At some point, you have to ask which one actually was more beneficial to go after, or lucrative. Whatever his perception of that reason for that, I do not believe it says that it is because of any genuinely cogent philosophical case which might be made for atheism as a worldview. And it's to this subject which he turns to the debate.
All right. So what he says here is basically, Stein studied this, and this was his area of expertise, but for some reason he moved to, trying to defend atheism. Right. And Bahnsen is suggesting he's not sure why he did that, because atheism isn't defendable. That's basically what it is.
Well, and these are both doctors, and so Dr. Bahnsen had his doctorate in philosophical systems, and Dr. Stein has it in science, in just science. And what was his field of expertise? Well, it's Japanese aviary biology. So this was actually a good point for Bahnsen to bring up for his own camp as well. It's not to say, well, Dr. Bahnsen, he studied philosophy, so he's probably the winner of this just based on the credit alone. Well, that's not going to be the case because it's not the pedigree that Dr. Bahnsen's trying to make the case for. It's for the biblical Christian God and the evidences that he believes are the best way forward for that. So this was a interesting point where he pointed to his opponent and says, this guy's not even a philosopher. Why are we talking about philosophical systems? I'm the real philosopher. You should just automatically give me the points in favor of anything that I say because I know it better than he does. So he doesn't do that as well.
But he does suggest here that Stein has spent over the last decade studying this particular field.
Right. Yeah, so he should be ready for all the responses in this debate. All right, well, that's just the first opening half of Dr. Bahnsen's opening statement. We wanted to pause here to this was the halfway point. He sets up the stage for the debate. And that's what we're doing. We're setting up the stage for the debate. So when we come back next week, we'll have the second portion of Dr. Bahnsen's opening statement. And from there, we'll continue in our book that all the links will be available for below. I will try and get motivated again to do short clips. I've got a whole field of them sitting in my box waiting to be posted. And so I'll get on that shortly as well. So caveofthecross.com for all the books that we've done. And then also our YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Twitter, Facebook, people that still use those things. So all those places that you can find us, and also on your favorite audio podcast platform as well. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.